Hey athletes, welcome to lesson 3 of this module on leg. This lesson will be focusing on leg simplification to support our mannequin. Now that we've gone through all the muscles of the leg, it's time to see how we can manipulate the simple forms of the mannequin to better represent an appearance of a human leg. When we look at the two forms that make up the leg, we essentially draw them as two tapering cylinders, similar to the arm. Looking at what we've learned about the bones and muscles, we can now come up with a better mannequin. When we look at the legs, it's better to encapsulate all muscles into a single form that best represents the form of the legs. For the upper leg, this means that this would be a tapering cylinder with a wider top than bottom and a slightly manipulated contour. For the lower leg, we can identify a similar form, keeping in mind that the main mass will sit on the posterior side to account for the mass of the gastrocnemius muscle. Yet overall, this is also a tapering cylinder with a manipulated contour. Note that the top of the upper leg form wedges nicely into the underwear form of the pelvis, and the bottom of the lower leg wedges nicely into the foot. A very important detail to remember is that we have a third form that accounts for the knee joint. This form represents both epicondyles of the femur and tibia respectively, as well as the patella, and takes up quite some space between the upper and lower mass of the leg, so keep this in mind. When we look at the foot will nicely lend itself to the form of a shoe with the big toe separated at the front. This essentially will suffice for your spatial and volume understanding of the figure. Yet, if we look at the Bridgman abstraction of the foot, we can see a more complicated interpretation. The heel is represented by a chamfered box onto which the ankle wedges. Then the middle of the foot is a triangular box that wedges into a flattened box that essentially encompasses the toes, again with the big toe as a separator. Lastly, remember that these forms should still have gesture and flow to suggest correct balance in the figure. Regardless of body type, these gestures are always best kept intact. When drawing legs from imagination in various angles, your grasp over these manipulated forms will provide you with increased confidence when designing characters and even creatures from imagination. When we look at a shaded version of the leg, we can clearly see that the parts that fall into shadow correspond with the planes of the simple forms that interlock with each other. When we look at a more feminine version of the simplified legs, we can see that the upper leg has a slightly increased volume to account for the wider pelvis around the trochanter, and that the spacing of both legs will be slightly further apart to form what we call a thigh gap. Again, this gap is generally more present with women for giving birth. Your assignment for this lesson will be to redraw your 5 completed legs from the previous lesson in their simplified interlocking form. That's it, heartleads. Have fun, and we'll see you in the next one.